In the beautiful and sun-soaked region of Florida and Alabama, there's a place known as Floribama. This area is known for its laid-back lifestyle, its beautiful beaches, and its friendly people. But there's also a dark side to Floribama. In recent years, there have been a number of high-profile murders in the region, each one more shocking than the last. Floribama Murders is a true crime documentary series that premiered on January 6th of 2023 on Oxygen. The series explores the hidden dangers and some of the killers investigated in the region around the Florida-Alabama border, known as Floribama. YouTube video series will explore some of the most notorious Floribama murders. We will take a look at the factors that may have contributed to these crimes, and we will try to understand why these murders happened in a place that is so often associated with peace and tranquility. The first season of Floribama Murders consists of 8 episodes, each of which tells the story of a different homicide case. Before we get started, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of our upcoming videos. Lakeland Lotto Mystery. The Lakeland Lotto Mystery episode of the Floribama Murders Oxygen series tells the story of Abraham Shakespeare, a homeless man who won a $31 million lottery jackpot in 2006. Shakespeare quickly became a target for people who wanted to take his money, including Dee Dee Moore, a woman who befriended him and eventually convinced him to give her control of his finances. Moore used Shakespeare's money to buy herself a house, a car, and other luxury items. She also convinced Shakespeare to sign over power of attorney to her, which gave her complete control over his finances. In 2009, Shakespeare disappeared and was never seen again. In 2012, Moore was convicted of Shakespeare's murder and sentenced to life in prison. She claimed that she had killed Shakespeare in self-defense, but prosecutors argued that she had killed him for his money. The Lakeland Lotto Mystery episode of Floribama Murders explores the events leading up to Shakespeare's death and the investigation into his murder. The episode also examines the greed and manipulation that can lead people to commit murder. The episode is based on a true story and is a reminder that even the most unlikely people can become targets for murder when they come into a lot of money. It's also a cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting strangers and the importance of financial literacy. Death comes to Davie. In the quiet town of Davie, Florida, a young woman is found strangled to death. Her body is discovered in her cheerleading uniform, and her death sends shockwaves through the community. Former FBI agent Charlie Parker is called in to investigate the murder. Parker knows that this is no ordinary case. The town of Davie has a dark secret, and this young woman is not the first victim. Parker quickly discovers that Davie is a town where appearances are deceiving. The surface is sunny and carefree, but underneath lurks a world of jealousy, rivalry, and resentment. Parker also learns that the town has a history of violence against women. As Parker digs deeper into the case, she uncovers a web of secrets that have been carefully hidden for years. She also comes face to face with the town's dark underbelly. The clock is ticking as Parker races against time to catch the killer before he strikes again. But the killer is always one step ahead of her. In the end, Parker is able to solve the case and bring the killer to justice, but the experience leaves her changed. Gone in Gainesville. The episode Gone in Gainesville from Oxygen series Floribama Murders tells the story of the disappearance and murder of University of Florida student Christian Andreacchio. Andreacchio was last seen on February 12, 2014 after leaving his apartment to go to a bar. His body was found 2 days later in a wooded area near Gainesville. He has been shot multiple times. Police initially investigated Andreacchio's death as a suicide, but his family and friends never believed that he would take his own life. They hired a private investigator, who soon uncovered evidence that suggested Andreacchio had been murdered. The private investigators' findings led police to focus their investigation on Andreaccio's roommate, Christopher C.J. Smith. Smith had a history of violence and had been involved in a fight with Andreacchio just days before his death. Smith also had access to Andreaccio's gun, which was the murder weapon. In 2017, Smith was arrested and charged with Andreaccio's murder. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The episode Gone in Gainesville tells the story of Andreaccio's disappearance and murder and the investigation that led to Smith's conviction. It's a gripping and heartbreaking story of a young man's life cut short, and the justice that was finally served for his family and friends. Devastated in Deltona. In the quiet town of Deltona, Florida, a seemingly ordinary man named Michael McKnight had a dark secret. He was a gambling addict. His addiction eventually led him to debt and a deadly betrayal. Michael often spent his nights in the neon glow of casinos, chasing the elusive thrill of victory. But his addiction was taking a toll on his life. He was piling up debt, and his relationship with his girlfriend Sarah was suffering. One day, Michael disappeared. Sarah was worried sick and contacted the authorities. 2 days later, his body was found in the woods, brutally dismembered. Investigators soon zeroed in on Christopher Williams, a friend of Michael's who had loaned him money. Christopher claimed that Michael had attacked him in a fit of desperation and that he had killed him in self-defense. But prosecutors argued that Christopher had planned the murder from the start. They said he had lured Michael into the woods and killed him in cold blood. The case went to trial, and Christopher was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Targeted in Beulah. In the quiet town of Beulah, Florida, a seemingly ordinary family was targeted for murder in a crime that shocked the community. The Billings family was known for their philanthropy and their commitment to helping others. But on July 9th of 2009, their lives were brutally taken away. Bud and Melanie Billings were found shot to death in their home along with their 11-year-old son Dylan. Their 9-year-old son Cole was also shot, but survived. The crime scene was horrific, and investigators quickly realized that this was no ordinary robbery. The investigation into the Billings murders quickly turned into a complex case as investigators tried to piece together the motive and identity of the suspects. The Billings family had no known enemies, and there was no apparent reason why anyone would want to hurt them. But as investigators dug deeper, they began to uncover a web of secrets and lies that surrounded the Billings family. They learned that Bud Billings had been involved in some shady business dealings, and that he may have owed some people money. They also learned that Melanie Billings had been struggling with depression, and that she had been taking medication for it. As the investigation progressed, investigators began to focus on a group of suspects who had ties to Bud Billings' business dealings. These suspects were eventually arrested and charged with the murders. The trial of the Billings murders was a media circus, and the community was eager to see justice served. In the end, all 4 of the suspects were convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Hidden in Chunchula. After Hurricane Ivan tears through the Floribama region, the discovery of a body in a burnt-out home in Chunchula, Alabama launches an investigation that reveals an unexpected evil in the community. In the quiet town of Chunchula, Alabama, a brutal murder shattered the community's sense of security. But as the investigation unfolded, the horrifying truth began to emerge, revealing a monstrous act that had been hidden in plain sight. Lisa Nicholas was a kind-hearted woman with a complex past. She had a lot of boyfriends, but she had never found the perfect guy. On the night of the hurricane, she was home alone, waiting for a date who never showed up. That night, Lisa was brutally murdered in her own home. Her body was found charred and barely recognizable. The police were baffled by the crime scene. There were no signs of forced entry and nothing appeared to be missing. The detectives pursued every lead, but they quickly hit a dead end. The case went cold, and the town of Chunchula began to heal from the tragedy. But then, 2 years later, the case was reopened. A new detective had taken over the investigation, and he had a hunch that he could crack it. The detective's hunch was right. He eventually uncovered the identity of the killer, Jeremy Bryan Jones, a man with a chilling history. Jones was a master of deception. He had used aliases and evaded justice for years. He was finally brought to justice for the murders of Lisa Nicholas, and he was sentenced to death. The town of Chunchula will never forget the darkness that touched their town, but they will never give up hope. Clay County Killer. The owners of an Alabama country store are brutally murdered in their home. Detectives must sort through a maze of bootlegging, gambling, and family secrets to uncover the killer. In 2001, the small town of Clay County, Florida was rocked by a horrific crime. Billy and Debbie Triplett, a beloved couple and pillars of the community, were brutally murdered in their store. The investigation quickly focused on their son, Randy. Randy had a history of drug abuse and financial problems, and he'd been seen arguing with his parents on the night of the murders. The evidence against Randy was circumstantial, but it was damning. Blood smudges were found in his car, and the money he claimed was given to him by a friend had traces of Debbie's blood. Randy was arrested and charged with double murder. He went on trial, and the case was closely watched by the community. Randy's defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that he was innocent. They said that the blood in his car could have been from a deer he hit, and that the money with Debbie's blood on it could have been planted. The prosecution argued that the evidence against Randy was overwhelming. They said that he had motive, opportunity, and the means to commit the murders. The jury deliberated for several days before returning a guilty verdict. Randy Triplett was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case of the Clay County killer is a tragedy that shook a small town to its core. It's a story of greed, betrayal, and violence, but it's also a story of justice. Randy Triplett may have escaped the death penalty, but he will never be free. He will spend the rest of his life in prison paying for the murders of his parents. The Triplett family will never forget the pain and suffering that Randy caused them. Jackson County Injustice. After a 4th of July celebration in Jackson County, Alabama, a man goes missing and is later found dead. Investigators must piece together the clues to his murder, which leads them to a dark and dangerous world. In the quiet town of Florida, a devoted father and hardworking man named Raul Guillen was brutally murdered. His body was found buried in barrels on a property owned by Jeremy Peters. Raul's disappearance set off a chain of events that would unravel a chilling story of greed, betrayal, and revenge. Detective Cherie Edwards and her team began piecing together the puzzle, tracing Raul's steps to a mechanic shop in Alabama where his car had been abandoned. A reliable informant came forward with information that led them to Jeremy Peters. Peters was a known drug dealer who had a history of violence. The search for evidence at the alleged burial site was hampered by a torrential downpour, adding to the frustration of investigators. A breakthrough came when police discovered evidence at Jeremy Peters' property linking him to Raul's murder. Lauren Wambles, Jeremy Peters' girlfriend, confessed to her involvement in the crime, revealing the grim details of Raul's horrific murder. Raul was lured to Peters' property under false pretenses. He was then beaten, tortured, and finally buried alive in barrels. The trial painted a harrowing picture of Raul's final moments, exposing the cold-bloodedness of those responsible. Shane Parker and Jeremy Peters were found guilty, facing the consequences of their actions. The story of Jackson County's injustice served as a reminder of the evil that can exist even in the most seemingly innocent places. It's also a story of the power of law enforcement to bring justice to those who have been wronged. These are just a few of the Floribama murders that have shocked and horrified the region. These cases are all reminders that even in the most beautiful and seemingly peaceful places, there is always the potential for violence. The Floribama Murders are a topic that has been explored in several true crime books and documentaries. In 2023, the Oxygen Network aired a documentary series called Floribama Murders that explored some of the most notorious cases. The investigation into the unsolved murders that have occurred in the Florida-Alabama border region is important for several reasons. First, it brings attention to these cases and hopefully leads to new leads. Second, it provides a glimpse into the lives of the victims and their families. This can be a difficult and emotional experience, but it is also important to remember the victims and to honor their memory. The investigation can also help to provide closure for the families of the victims. Third, it can help to educate the public about the dangers of crime. The cases being investigated are often complex and involve multiple suspects. The investigation can help to teach people about the signs of danger and how to protect themselves from becoming victims of crime. True crime is a popular genre, and the investigation into the Floribama Murders is sure to appeal to the fans of the genre. The analysis is well conducted and features interviews with experts and witnesses. It's a compelling and informative look into some of the most notorious crimes in the Florida-Alabama border region. If you or someone you know has been the victim of a crime, please reach out for help. There are resources available to you. You don't have to go through this alone. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. The National Sexual Assault Hotline, 1-800-656-HOPE. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.